The terrible toll of suffering in Gaza's struggling hospitals has been described in vivid detail by a Canadian medic. According to the UN, 2/3 of hospitals in Gaza are now not functioning, with several either shut or under Israeli siege. That includes the Al-Shifa and the Al-Amal hospitals. At one of the few still functioning, the Al-Aqsa, Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan has been recording her experiences working in intensive care. Her harrowing testimony, sometimes recorded beneath the sounds of Israeli drones, is, we must warn you, at times deeply distressing.
I'm a pediatric intensive care doctor, but just with the nature of the mass casualties here, I often also care for adults in the emergency department.
All the patients I'm seeing are civilians, young families, old families, extended families.
A lot of the doctors are actually living in the hospital now because their homes have been destroyed, and they essentially work 24/7. They're on call all the time.
There's a 6-year-old little girl in the ICU right now with traumatic brain injury after her home was bombed by Israeli forces. Her mother, who's quite young, her youngest son, so the little girl's little brother, was killed, and the little girl has severe brain injury and is in the ICU right now. And, she's looking at her daughter, who she doesn't recognize anymore, and thinking of her son, who's been killed. Yeah, and I think the same thing every time I look at that little girl. Her long lashes, her curls. It just exacerbates this feeling of injustice when the innocence is just so evident.
We also have a boy, a 10-year-old, that lives in the ER. Actually, he has a tent right outside the ER. His parents, we think, are somewhere in the south, if they're alive, or we're told they're somewhere in the south. And he has learned how to do every skill in the hospital. So he helps us. He goes through resuscitation cart, gets us equipment. He sees everything, but he just seems so used to it. He walks in, he sees a man hemorrhaging out of an amputated extremity, and he knows exactly what needs to be brought to the patient to resuscitate him. It's quite funny. It's sad. So the sun is just rising right now. It was a long night. Long day, actually. Started with a colleague of ours, one of the operating room nurses, arriving in very dire condition after an area where his family lives was bombed. He went to help some of the victims and was shelled while he was trying to help them. He was brought to the hospital in critical condition. We tried to resuscitate him. He was taken to the operating room, and unfortunately, eventually he died. He's a young operating room nurse who had been in love with the same woman for a very long time, and they got engaged just as the war broke out. His fiance was at his bedside, devastated, having lost the love of her life.
The ER is jam-packed with patients who are in critical condition, entire families, elderly, children, women. Today we had a little boy, a 5-year-old little boy, who was shot in the head, and we tried to resuscitate him. Unfortunately, he passed away after several hours. Has any of his family survived? We just don't know. You have doctors and nurses holding his hand in the beginning when he was awake. Doctors and nurses praying for him as he dies. Nobody else from his family there to comfort him. And it's horrifying. You walk away utterly infuriated, just full of rage that we live in a world where we have governments and officials in society condoning or very actively refusing to stop this genocide.